Let's go. Okay. Hi. All right. Thank you. Hi, everybody. This is Michael McCoskey. I'm President CEO of JINSA. It's great to have you here on Thursday, May 29th. Let's get going. We got a lot to talk about. We have a lot of people. We actually have an unusual amount of retired U.S. generals and admirals on our call and media and so on. And there's a lot to talk about. I want to first briefly, I don't know if anyone has anything new to say, but I'll turn to Ayish and well, let me introduce our guests. I apologize. Um, we're joined as usual by we have General Yaacov Ayish, who's Senior VP, Josephson Senior VP for Israeli Affairs here at JINSA, and former IDF head of IDF Operations J3. We have General Yaakov Amidror, a distinguished fellow here at JINSA, former National Security Advisor, Prime Minister Netanyahu. We have the Randi and Charles Wax, senior fellow, John Hanna with me. So we got a great group. We want to talk about the U.S. side. We want to talk about what's going on in Israel. And I want to start with Gaza. And obviously what's been in the news in the last couple of days about the about this possible new Witkoff proposal for a ceasefire deal. And I've seen different reports, so I'm going to get this wrong. And certainly the Israelis, particularly, I'm sure General Amidror, you could point out to me if I'm getting something wrong here. But what we're reading here, it seems to be maybe a 60-day ceasefire, 10 live Israeli hostages, maybe 5 released in the first week. I think I've seen, I don't know if this is what it actually is, but I've seen reported, and then 5 released in the following week. There'd be 18 deceased hostages that would also be exchanged, I guess, along with the live hostages. And then there'd be also talks. There'd be obviously a lot of Palestinian prisoners released on the Israeli side. And then there'd be talks about ending the conflict over those 60 days. But if what I just saw is if both sides don't agree, then there could be a resumption. I saw that Hamas wants clarity on where Israeli military forces would withdraw from. This is obviously not a done deal in any way. I don't know, General Amidror, do you have anything to just address about just the ceasefire deal?
Yes, there is a formal announcement by the Americans. The White House said that the Israelis said yes, and the Hamas didn't answer yet.
Okay, good.
There is an Saudi Arabia newspaper which speak about the agreement of Hamas, but formally Hamas didn't agree yet, and we are waiting to the reaction of Hamas.
Okay, I appreciate your clarity on that. I assume, General, you think if there was such a deal, depending on how some of the more details come out, broadly speaking, do you think that would be a good thing?
I think that Israel insists that whatever will be the agreement, it is not the end of the war. And if will not be agreement about the end of the war, Israel will resume the operation immediately after the end of the ceasefire, which will be agreed. And this is the most important part of the agreement from our point of view, because we don't want to be caught by the agreement and to stop the war now when we are very close to put the Hamas in impossible situation on the ground and relating to the controlling of the humanitarian aid. And this is why we are insisting that it is not the end of the war. It is the beginning of negotiations. But if the negotiations will not bring a good agreement from the Israeli point of view, Israel will resume the war at the end of the ceasefire.
This, General Ayish, do you have anything you want to add? I guess it seems to me that this broad agreement, based on what I'm reading, and again, we don't know all the details, but it's basically what's been offered roughly for the last few weeks. It seems like even before Trump's visit. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, there are obviously some details that have changed, I'm sure. But a temporary ceasefire for about half the live hostages has been what's been on the table for weeks now, I think.
You are absolutely right. But let me try and introduce the broader context to what we have seen today, to the proposal that was put on the table today. And I think it's a direct result of a very carefully orchestrated campaign by General Zamir into the Gaza Strip. What we have seen in the
Chief of
last, I
Staff
would
of the
say,
IDF. Yeah.
Chief of Staff of the IDF, what we have seen in the last few weeks is something very well organized and planned. It started slowly because that was the exact policy it got from the political level, and gradually increased pressure on Hamas. And when the IDF arrived to the stage that they are literally threatening their ability to govern, the ability of Hamas to govern the Gaza Strip, to distribute the humanitarian aid and to make money out of that, suddenly you can see a positive reaction from Hamas, together with the targeted killing and the different maneuver that is done on the ground that we will speak later on. The impact that was created, the pressure that was mounted on Hamas brought them to the table, allegedly with a positive attitude. This is where we are, and without elaborating too much, we have to keep in mind that this is not the only context. Since the ceasefire in Lebanon, we have eliminated more than 400 Hezbollah terrorists. Since the ceasefire, this is only over there. We tend not to speak in these webinars about more than 800 terrorists that were killed in Judea and Samaria. We don't mention yet Yemen, and the elephant in the room is the readiness, and I will say it again, the readiness to Iran that is directly affected from what we have described until now. So within that context, what we see now is a direct, to my opinion, results to a carefully managed campaign by the IDF, by General Zamir on Hamas in Gaza.
Yeah, just to clarify that.
If I may add one fact to the very good picture which was drawn by Ayish, is the fact that it is there are more than rumors that Israel is negotiating with the new regime in Damascus. So all those which thought that we will have to move from friction with the old regime to friction with the new regime, and we are maybe something new is emerging. We are very careful, very careful. We didn't move what we did, what we took under our control in the east part of the Israeli Golan Heights. We're still in the peak of the Hermon Mountain and along the old border. When we moved our forces 10 kilometers to the east, we are still patrolling within Syrian areas. But this negotiation with the Syrian new regime might bring something new even in this area. And it is not surprising that Hezbollah is not reacting to our operations, because they understand that they lost the ability to be helped by someone from the outside. It's now practically impossible. The Syrian regime is very strict about preventing any move of any weapon system from Syria into Lebanon, and they understand that they are isolated.
Yeah, by the way, to General Ayish's point, also, one of the people that the Israelis killed, one of the terrorists, is Mohammed Sinwar, right? So
yeah, and the commander of the south part of the Hamas system. So they remain with only one guy which was high in the hierarchy at the beginning of the war. It is the commander of the north. He's the only one which survived our attacks. And they understand that they now very close to the corner.
Yeah. But Mike, with that said, we tend to emphasize the fact that we have eliminated their military leadership, and that's exactly what we did. But I think the sensitive nerve that was touched carefully by the IDF is their ability really to provide a substitute to Hamas in terms of distributing the humanitarian support.
Okay, so I appreciate that. So let me get back to that.
During this process, the locals are demonstrating against Hamas.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you've listed a number of reasons why Hamas is in a weaker position and therefore more maybe amenable to some sort of ceasefire agreement that maybe wasn't the case a few weeks ago, is what I think. I want to pick up on, and I do want to see that it seems like a hostage deal would obviously be very popular in Israel. I want to just turn to John to take the piece about the humanitarian aid. Then I want to go back to Gaza on the operational stuff that General Ice was referring to and General Amidror. John, look, obviously, it's been in the news here a lot. The generals just spoke about this. Clearly, it's been a weakening of Hamas. Um, and of course, you have the UN, which tells you something how that they've been critical about this new approach to humanitarian aid. I'd like you to explain what is going on the humanitarian aid. It's a new approach by the Israelis that I guess the idea is to try to keep the aid out of Hamas's hands, which they have utilized for all sorts of benefits, money, patronage, control, and so on in Gaza. And now that they're being denied that, it's weakened them. But I want to just say to the audience before John, and I want you to address this also because some of you might remember in the audience that JINSA put out something. We did a joint project with the Vandenberg Coalition. We started it in the end of October of 2023. We thought that what's going to be the day after. We talked about the day after many times on these webinars, but what should be the webinar? Obviously, we thought since October 7th was obviously a awful surprise for the Israelis. They didn't really think about it. They didn't even have a plan for invasion in Gaza. White House wasn't. So we did some with the coalition, the Vandenberg Coalition, which is headed by Elliot Abrams. And John, you chaired this effort. And maybe you could just briefly explain just, before we get into what's going on today, but just a little the genesis. I mean, we briefed the U.S., the Israelis, some of our Gulf countries on our ideas, including beginning in, I think, December 2023 and January of 2024. And that seems to have influenced the approach that the Israelis are taking now. So if you could talk about today and what happened before and where we are today.
Yeah, sure, Mike. Just on the group, as you said, I mean, our assumption going in after October 7th was to get to any kind of day after, you had to effectively eradicate and destroy Hamas, both militarily and politically. B, no other force in the world was going to do that but the IDF. They were the only ones who were going to take on and destroy Hamas. So they needed to be provided with sufficient time and space to do that work by the United States and the international community. C, humanitarian aid, for whether we like it or not, was going to be a significant center of gravity, both because we knew that the more pictures of suffering, Palestinians on the verge of hunger or even starvation, the more pressure there would be on Israel to stop. We knew that all. We were all former officials. We'd been involved in other of Israel's wars with the Palestinians in Lebanon, et cetera. So we knew humanitarian aid was important from that standpoint, but it was also important, humanitarian aid, because we knew it was a primary pillar of Hamas's control over the population, its ability to raise revenue, its ability to pay fighters, its ability to incentivize the population, but also to punish the population. So we decided that the way to attack the humanitarian question was that you needed to take the delivery and distribution of aid away from Hamas, while at the same time, the IDF was defeating them militarily. We looked around for who could do that. How would that be done? And we decided there were not going to be any parties, either in the Arab world. The UN, UNRWA dominated the humanitarian system. They were complicit with Hamas. We knew they couldn't really be involved in this. The Arabs wouldn't be involved. We didn't want the American government on the ground taking this over. And we certainly didn't think the IDF, while they were fighting, should be responsible for the humanitarian needs of 2 million people. So what we proposed were two big ideas on how you jumpstart the process of addressing the humanitarian question. And as you do that, maybe eventually you can build from that to the more political, civilian matters of the day after. But one, we said, create a nonprofit private entity that's backed multinationally, funded multinationally, and that has representatives appointed by different critical stakeholders. The United States, we thought important, but also we very much wanted Arab involvement. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. But the other thing, we knew you have to secure the operations of this private entity that's going to take over the humanitarian efforts. And again, we didn't see many volunteers to do that. We didn't think it should be the IDF's primary responsibility. And while we were open to other people, countries, even non-Hamas Palestinians stepping up, we didn't think many people would while the IDF was conducting its operation. So we settled on this controversial idea: use this industry of private security contractors, PSCs, that had gotten so much experience during the war on terror, doing things with the American military, had learned a lot of lessons after some negative and bad incidents that happen everywhere in wartime. But use these PSCs who would be willing to come in and protect the operations of this new humanitarian aid organization. And we briefed those initially to the U.S., Israeli, and a couple of major Arab governments in January of 2024, hoping it would begin fairly quickly. Got a lot of interest, including from the Israeli government. And we could continue to consult with members of the government on how you would develop these ideas. But when you fast forward now, the first time we saw PSCs appearing in Gaza was during the last ceasefire brokered at the end of January, when they played a minor role in the Netzarim corridor, monitoring car traffic, vehicle traffic going from the south to the north during that ceasefire. And it seemed to work reasonably well. But then now, over the last month or so, I'd say you'd seen this idea really begin to gel of this new organization, a private nonprofit registered in Switzerland and the United States, called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that is going to be protected by something like, I think, about 1,000 American private security contractors. They're going to be located in this area around Rafah that the IDF has carved out. They've put in several distribution sites there where they think Gazans can securely go, be free of Hamas, to collect these packages of aid and bring them back to their families to feed their families. And that's now what's started to happen this week. It's had a number of hiccups, I would say. It had a bad day its first day. Of course, you've got a lot of very, very hungry, desperate Palestinians. It's hard to know exactly, maybe the generals know, how bad the chaos was on that first day. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and I think the Israeli government saying it's being overblown. There was an issue. It was handled. Order was restored. Aid was gotten out the door. And the second day was smoother and better. So it seems to be working. I would say, without knowing everything about this foundation, I'm relatively proud that I think we've made an intellectual contribution. And I should say that both of our generals were important interviews that we conducted when we were in the course of this research back at the end of 2023 and early 2024. But I think our two big ideas, kickstart this process by creating some kind of entity that will take this away from both Hamas and from the UN system, from UNRWA, to get aid to suffering Palestinians, even while the IDF is doing its important work of destroying Hamas, and figure out a way to protect it using this industry that we have. It's not perfect by any means, but there are some pretty good professional soldiers, a lot of U.S. Special Forces who know their way around the Middle East. Some of them speak Arabic even, and make them protect this. Those two big ideas we had, I think, have clearly had some part in influencing the adoption of this idea by the United States now, the Trump administration, and by Israel. And I think we should all root for it to succeed, because I think the best proof of that this could be serious is the fact you've had so much Hamas opposition to it. Hamas is actively telling Gazans, don't participate in this. It's creating all kinds of lies and propaganda around the effort. And yet we see from the pictures, Gazans are going there. This is the beginning of really helping to separate these Gazans who are increasingly obviously upset with Hamas, separating them from Hamas. This is part of that overall effort to begin trying to start building some kind of alternative to the Hamas system in Gaza that Palestinians eventually can take some level of ownership of. So that's the idea. Unfortunately, our idea was that the UN, the non-UNRWA parts of the humanitarian aid community working in Gaza, they should cooperate and participate in this effort. We didn't want to replace the entire humanitarian system. We wanted to really ramp it up and plus it up and take it away from Hamas. Unfortunately, the established international aid community, with all of the various agendas it has that are probably quite problematic, have been completely opposed to this so far, and even are being threatened. Apparently, we heard today by the United Nations that any NGOs that participate with this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation could somehow be penalized in their operations by the United Nations system. I don't know if that's true, but we heard that today in the United Nations Security Council. Anyway, I'll stop there, Mike, but I'm sure our generals have a few comments too.
I appreciate your adding. I'll just add the fact that you have the UN against this plan and Hamas against it, to me tells you a lot.
Yeah.
And that's so kudos, John, on you're leading this effort on this. So I don't know. I'll turn to General Ayish and General Amidror if you want to address what John just said.
Two remarks, if I can. One, in the first day, there were two centers which succeeded to provide the Gazans till the middle of the day. And then the number of people came in, and it was totally chaotic situation. No one was hurt. The IDF didn't open fire. All these stories are not true. They learned the lessons. Today there were 3 places in which they provide the food. And at the end, it will be probably more. And it was very good days in which they succeeded to provide the thousands of boxes to the Gazan people. The main issue is Hamas is doing everything that will fail, because for them, it's losing their ability to control something which is the essence of their non-military ability to control Gaza, is to provide the food. There were some demonstrations against Hamas in between. Hamas killed some Palestinians in those demonstrations. And let's see, the test is in the continuation of the project in the next few days.
General Ayish, you wanted to?
Okay, yeah, I'd like to go back to the JINSA Vandenberg coalition, to John, to Elliot, and the others that came with the idea. Hey, it wasn't so simple. When they came with the idea, keep in mind that ministers in the Israeli government thought that it has to be done by the IDF. People tend to forget it. And let me remind our participants that our chief of the general staff opposed that option. that the IDF will distribute it. So the importance of that idea came again from this great team is not only in the way it is applied now and the strategic implications that were discussed and described by John, it's also internally within the Israeli system, within the IDF has its own importance. And the best way to identify that it is the right move is the fact that Hamas is very, very nervous to the extent that suddenly they are coming back to the table.
Mike, can I just, as a matter of protocol, mention, because it was a small group of people, but they all made tremendous contributions. In addition to Elliot and myself, Scooter Libby, a good friend of JINSA, was absolutely critical. Robert Deneen, Steve Price, Gary Ginsberg, Emily Harding, all made tremendous contributions. We worked. Jonathan Rui, of course, from JINSA, was my partner in putting the reports and everything together. So it was a great team effort that you supported and Vandenberg supported.
Great and creative, I must say. Very creative.
Thank you, General. Thank you.
Let me ask you, John, and yeah, we thought about this 3 days after October 7th. We thought, oh boy, no one's thinking about the day after. So that's why we reached out to Elliot at that time. And I guess some of the other guys in the group were already starting to talk about it by coincidence also.
And we should say, Mike, I mean, just while we're giving kudos to Yaniv Melman and General Ayish, who facilitated 2 trips in very short order at the very highest levels of the IDF, Defense Ministry, Prime Minister's office, other places.
It became an exchange of nice words between us, and I'm not sure that everyone is so interested.
Well, so let me ask, and by the way, there was a retired U.S. general. The group talked to about 100 people. But General Barbero, who was head of the operations in the surge under General Petraeus, who's been involved with JINSA for a long time and a very sharp guy, and he had a lot of experience in dealing with these, and he was very helpful to the group and to try to understand this. But but of course, John, there's good ideas, and then there's the execution. So what do you? You described what's happened in the last few days, but maybe you also want to explain what could go wrong here, or what are the challenges in the execution of all this, and what those involved need to be careful of to make sure it's successful?
Yeah, listen, there's a lot I don't know. There's probably a lot of water under the bridge. If you had started in January, February, if it had been possible, again, you don't know if it's possible, but our hope was that it would start early and it would be concurrent with major IDF combat operations, places that the IDF was able to clear, that it didn't want to have to leave a lot of troops behind. If it had gotten rid of most Hamas, you would have brought this and created an ink spots, classic counterinsurgency, in which you would be holding and building some kind of alternative. That unfortunately hasn't been able to happen. Instead, we've got only these few distribution points in the south where all the population has to actually move, some at fairly great distance probably, to get to the aid. Hopefully there will be more of these distribution points later across other parts of Gaza. We really thought it was important. Unfortunately, the rollout of this has made it sound, some of the press and media have tried to create the narrative that this was a made in Israel idea in order to delegitimize it in the eyes of the Arab world, the UN, the Palestinians. We wanted very much, and we emphasized trying to avoid that. We couldn't get the Biden administration, even though they were very welcoming to the ideas. They were so focused on getting to a ceasefire throughout most of 2024 that they didn't really want to have to deal too much with day after issues. And they had their own ideas about day after, which were classic non-starters. You had to bring the PA in and then the Israeli government wasn't willing to hear that. You needed to use the UN system, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't get traction with the Americans, which meant even though the Arab states, some of the major financial backers for this potentially, who expressed to the 2 governments we talked to, expressed interest, but without American backing, it would have been very hard to rally them. But that's sort of behind us now. hopefully, I think the Trump administration, once this concept proves itself, is willing to go back and try and put some pressure on the international community to be supportive of this idea. Nothing is going to be perfect. Nothing's going to feed 2.2 million Palestinians right away. But my God, if we're feeding 1 million right away who aren't being fed, if we're weakening Hamas, a genocidal terrorist group, at the same time we're trying to take care of suffering Palestinians, don't boycott the effort. Try and make it better. Try and improve it. And so I hope the Trump administration, beyond simply saying this is a good idea, go forward, make it work, I hope they actually put some diplomatic muscle into making this work. The sorts of things I worry about are clearly, something happens and you get 100 American contractors killed. It is U.S. citizens on the ground there now in Gaza. And you don't know what the political impact of that would be, either on President Trump's view of the effort. Maybe it would make him double down on it to make sure it succeeds and to destroy Hamas, but it could make him flinch and pull back and say, I don't want any Americans in harm's way in Gaza. So that makes me nervous. And then, of course, you get nervous that American contractors, Hamas, the Iranians, somebody will engineer a potential massacre of Gazans, and you have American contractors killing 100 Gazans. Something like that, I think, would be very problematic. I don't know anything about the rules of engagement, the system of accountability for these private security contractors, exactly what the coordination mechanism is with the IDF. Is there a joint center? I assume there's something like that inside of Israel that's monitoring and overwatching this more or less 24/7. But there's some outstanding questions. But those are some of the issues and nightmare scenarios I have that I hope people have planned for. And again, as bad as that first day might have been, it didn't. I think to the extent the American contractors allegedly fell back, allowed some of the aid to be taken by these mobs of Palestinians that rushed forward, it might have been a far better result than having a major killing of what appeared to be civilian Palestinians on that first day, even though I'm sure at some point in time Hamas is going to really try and engineer some bad incidents. And I just think we all have to steel ourselves. A, this is a work in progress. People are going to learn as they go along. But B, the bad guys still have a vote in this, and they're working very hard to try and make sure that this fails, precisely because it does pose such a threat to their control over this population.
All right, thanks for. I'll just let's move forward. I appreciate all that, and I encourage people to go on JINSA's website, look at our Gaza Futures project for the group report, for an essay John wrote also about it, and we'll be discussing this obviously more in the coming weeks. I want to turn back to the operations on the ground in Gaza, and then I want to deal with just a couple other issues like Syria, Iran talks, obviously, Yemen, if we put that in the next 26 minutes. General Ayish, let me ask you, you made a reference earlier that it sounds like since General Zamir has become chief of staff of the IDF in March, that the Israelis have taken a different approach. Maybe just explain, because we didn't really get in details last week on this, so maybe you could just explain what the IDF is planning, what is going on inside Gaza on the military side.
So I'll try and be as specific as I can. First and foremost, there is a different policy that the IDF is using in terms of publishing what is going on and what exactly we are doing. It's not a secret that it's an operation based on 5 division HQs. It's not really full divisions. It's not with their full capacity, but the idea is really to divide the Gaza Strip into different strips, secure them, and in a second I'll connect it again to the humanitarian support, and from those corridors to continue into the build-up area. and to clear it up above and under the ground. We have to keep in mind that certain neighborhoods are totally booby-trapped, totally covered not only with IEDs. When I'm saying booby-trapped, I mean barrels of explosives inside houses. So even if you clear up one room, you would have the next one and the one after him to include them, the roof and other places. So they have really to go and to clear it. This is one element. The second one that those divisions are doing is to make sure that rockets and mortars that are still somewhere there, either under the ground or in certain caches, hidden, are cleared by those divisions, because otherwise tomorrow it's going to be an imminent threat to the villages along the Gaza Strip, and that's what they are doing in order to clear it. The third element is to use those corridors later on for the humanitarian support, and John implied to some of it. We have to assume that there is a full coordination, and roads should be open. They have to be cleared from IEDs and mines. They have to be secured. You have to have the intelligence envelope, and someone have to communicate it to the locals what is allowed and from where they are allowed to approach these humanitarian support centers. And obviously, it's done with a certain degree of coordination. Started already at the Rafah area, and I think very soon we are going to see it in many other areas based on those corridors that those divisions have opened. And the idea is not only to open and to clear, but to gain full control on those areas. If we are going back a few months to the operations and the raids that we were doing to certain neighborhoods, we were clearing them and then leaving them. Now, it's a totally different idea. We are going to clear them, and the IDF is going to be deployed. The full plan of the IDF is to reach something between 75 to 80% control on the Gaza Strip. It's a huge part of the Gaza Strip when you are taking in consideration that the Mawasi is the humanitarian designated area for the locals. So the whole campaign here is taking in consideration two elements. One is the day after, and really to finish the mission and eliminate Hamas as a terror organization. And the other element is really to create the condition really to remove Hamas from power by allowing an alternative in terms of humanitarian support to the Gazans. And by that, today we are talking about humanitarian support. Tomorrow we might speak about those PSCs as the enablers for education, for reconstruction, for infrastructure, for sewage, for water, for electricity, for medical support. We tend to speak about food quite a lot in this webinar, but we have to keep in mind that the idea is bigger than that. It's it's the enabler that will allow in the future a different way to approach that challenging idea.
General Amidror, I know we talked about it a bit last week. Is there something you want to add on what General Ayish said?
I hope that we will not stop now, because I think that the moment that we are providing the Gazan people food without any interference of Hamas is a breakthrough. It's a model that we have to broaden in the future, and the more that will succeed, the better are the chances that Hamas understand that it is losing the control on the ground with the Palestinians. And this is, at the end of the day, our main goal in the war, that Hamas will not be relevant, not just as a threat to Israel as it is today, but also not relevant as a force inside the Gaza Strip.
But if there's a ceasefire agreement like we talked about, one of the things that Hamas has asked for, they like the old way better with the UN, their bedfellow there. So I
yes,
don't...
but that is true for the next 60 days. Then everyone understands, and the fact that the United Nations is complaining with Hamas against those arrangements it means that there are very good arrangements.
Let me just ask one of you, and then I want to move off of Gaza, which is, I'm sure a lot of people in the Middle East would like to do as well. But inside Israel, you read about, I'm not there, of course, but I hear a bit, from friends, but I read in these articles, it's a lot of fatigue among the reservists in Israel. So they said, okay, we did this war for a while, but now they want us to go back in. There's some people say, now, General Ice is suggesting there's a new approach to this. And but I gather, there's still fatigue inside Israel about, we've done this, it's enough already. I don't know. I just thought, is there something you want to address on that? And
first, the most of the units inside Gaza are regular units,
Regular.
supported by many reservists on the outer ring, but the most of the fighters, I don't know percentage, but maybe Aish knows, but percentagely, it is the regular units. And the main burden is on them. The reserve forces are responsible for the borders in Lebanon, in Syria, and in the West Bank. The fight inside Gaza is done by the regulars, first. Second, we don't see up till now any fatigue within the fighting units. The Alexandroni Brigade is somewhere in the north, and they have around 90, 95, 97% of the reservists came as they had been called, and they don't see any change in that. Okay. If the operation now in Gaza will be stopped for 60 days, I believe that we will release many reservists for this 2 months. It will make some, change in the schedule. It's not always very easy for those people which made plans for the next part of the year. But we try to manage it, to control it in a way that, yes, there is a huge burden on the reservist units, but if it is for finishing the job in Gaza, I believe that most of the reservists will come without any complaint, because they understand that this is something that should be done.
Yeah. Okay. Let me turn. We don't have a lot of time left, so let me just discuss a couple of issues. Look, Gaza obviously takes up a lot of space, but the big strategic issue is obviously the Iran nuclear issue. You have President Trump that's indicated that he told, kind of confirmed some press reports that he's kind of asked Prime Minister Netanyahu, maybe I don't know exactly the word if he said asked, but he's indicated that, while he thinks that Trump thinks that we might be near some sort of deal with the Iranians soon, maybe it's some sort of interim deal, and he doesn't want the Israelis to do any attacks while he feels there's a chance for a deal. I'll turn to you, General Amidror, first on this. Just how do you see the state of play?
I think that here in Israel, they made huge noises about it. I think I heard the president in his word, and it is his way to say, guys, we are negotiating, don't disturb us. We know what to negotiate about. We know how important it is. And when we are negotiating, please don't disturb. And I think it's natural question, natural demand or advised by the president, who is in the middle of negotiations. It doesn't surprise me. I always used to say that the time of the negotiation is the most problematic time for Israel to attack. Israel can attack before the negotiations and attack if there is a bad agreement, but Israel cannot attack when the Americans are negotiating and saying, we will get a good agreement. It'd be stupid to do it. So I don't see any problem in what was said by the president. It was his way to say, I am negotiating. Don't make any noise to disturb me. I'll bring a good agreement. And this is the real test. If the agreement will be a good one, in which all the enriched uranium will be will be taken out of Iran, and the enrichment system will be stopped, and they cannot continue to enrich inside Iran, and will not be a limit of timetable to the agreement. I mean, within 10 days, it's the end of the terms, and then the Iranians can do whatever they want. If these three issues will be dealt with by the Americans in a good way, and the inspection will be a very thorough one in which we can be sure that within the time of the agreement, the Iranians cannot cheat and cannot continue the enrichment. This is something that for Israel, it's better than a war. I remember myself, 2011, first meeting with my counterpart in the White House. I told him, Tom, don't make any mistake. Israel wants an agreement. If it will be a good agreement. We are against the bad agreement because bad agreement is worse than not having an agreement. But Israel wants a good agreement. And good agreement means that the Iranians cannot enrich uranium inside Iran. If that will be achieved by the Americans, every Israeli will bless the agreement.
And if it's a bad agreement?
If it's a bad agreement, Israel will have to react kinetically with the Americans or without the Americans.
Okay. General Ayish, you want to add?
So with that, yes, I'd like to add a few things. You know, maybe people are aware to it, but I think the conditions to the negotiations that we see now were created very much by Israel with a lot of support from the U.S. But basically, they were created by Israel by really bringing Iran to a very low point by doing what we did in Lebanon with Hezbollah and elsewhere. Having said that, I totally agree. If it is a great agreement, there's no discussion about it. However, readiness is part of the negotiations already. Israeli readiness is part of the day after. And I think in that sense, what we have heard again lately from our general staff, from General Staff Zamir regarding readiness is a key element from the negotiation. And they have to be prepared should something will fail. And in this regard, it has a lot of connection to the situation in Syria and to the situation in Iran. Because at the end of the day, in order to execute what is needed in Iran, these are relevant geographical parts that have to be taken in consideration. So everything here is interconnected, and I'll finalize it also with the situation in Gaza, because one of the participants wisely was asking, how come Israel is not doing more in Yemen? Two reasons. One was mentioned by me already, readiness to other places such as Iran. And the second, as far as I have heard, there are some limitations due to the American-British agreement with the Houthis.
All right. I wanted to get that, but John, Hannah, you want to chime in on the Iran issue from the U.S., what you see on the U.S. side?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing we've said it before, I think we said it last week, that I thought the U.S. statements on enrichment, after a degree of confusion, where I just don't think people on the U.S. side, before they agreed to start the negotiations, had really developed their own internal red lines for the kind of deal they wanted to get. But after some degree of confusion, a lot of pressure from different places, including from the Senate and from people like you and me, writing op-eds, worrying about what was coming down the pike. They've consolidated around this very tough position on enrichment. The Iranians, for their part, have been consistent all along. Do not think you're going to touch our enrichment. We're going to continue to enrich. Now, we maybe agree to pause for a period of time, but we're not dismantling centrifuges for sure. We're going to keep our infrastructure, and at some point in time, we retain the right to continue. So I'm just not sure how, at the same time, you can have these two very divergent red lines, and yet the talks go on, and the president says we're very close, at least to some kind of initial agreement and deal. I just don't know how you make these things overlap in a way that people will say, yes, there's no enrichment. We're dismantling all the centrifuges. Fordow and Natanz and the new facility they're building 300 feet under that mountain. Those are all going to be going away. We're going to get absolute clarity on their past military programs, and they'll never ever build an ICBM capable of carrying a nuclear weapon to hit the United States. I just don't know how you reconcile.
The missiles are not part of the negotiations, as far as we know.
Well, that's its own issue, and maybe its own problem, depending on what kind of sanctions relief they end up getting, which is a big question as well. If our purpose here is to just resolve the nuclear, but make the Islamic Republic a very rich, successful, wealthy country while it continues to back proxies and build intercontinental ballistic missiles, I think, and commit terrorism and sponsor terrorism, it's a real issue and problem that we haven't got to. So anyway, that bothers me, that I don't have a sense of confidence that that this negotiation is really headed in our direction. I hope it is. We'll just have to wait and see. The only thing else I'd say is it's very fascinating that Ron Dermer and the head of Mossad have been following Steve Witkoff everywhere he goes, around the world, in Rome and now in the United States. We saw him this week. I think it's terrific. I hope it shows that despite these talk about phone calls that were difficult and the president getting a little irritated, that things are really on track, and we've got a common view and position and understanding on all of this. And finally, I'd say the other thing that worries me is that whatever's happening on the nuclear doesn't come in a vacuum. President Trump's statement about the inappropriateness of an Israeli attack while they're negotiating, it doesn't come in a vacuum. It comes in almost a month's worth of, maybe 2 months worth of activity since the prime minister came in early April, where you just have a number of incidents where it seems like the Americans were less than vigilant in taking account of our best allies' positions on issues that are really important and vital to Israel's national security in a way that they aren't necessarily vital to America's national security, but we're partners, we're allies. We've got a history of trying to limit the number of surprises that we launch on each other, and to try and keep each other at least informed, transparent in the picture. And we haven't had a huge amount of that, it seems, over the course of the last couple of months. And that's the context for my worry about some of the dissonance on the Iranian issue that I see.
I also think it's the Israelis that set the table here. We have leverage with the Iranians, which I think gets forgotten because of what Israel has done since October 7th. Particularly, I would say since about a year ago when they went into Rafah, and I thought that really, to me, that was a turning point in the war. What they did to what they've done to Hamas, what they did to Hezbollah, what they've done inside Iran. It's the Israelis, it seems to me, that have created Syria. Excuse me, thank you. Then the fall of Assad and then what Israel did in wiping out almost all the Syrian weapons caches very quickly. It's the Israelis that have created this leverage. This isn't after like years of economic pressure by the United States. Trump just walked into this. And I think that shouldn't be forgotten, that it's the Israelis that created this leverage, not the Americans. And therefore, besides the fact that it so existentially affects Israel, I'd like to see a little more attention to Israeli concerns here.
If I may, a last sentence. I remember when we tried to convince the Americans to add some sanctions against the Iranians at 11, everyone told us that the Iranians will not negotiate about their nuclear project. It is out of question. It's a question of pride, of whatever. But at the end of the day, when the Americans were ready to put the big pressure on the Iranian economic system, including cutting them from the international money-paying system, that was the crucial moment in which the Iranians, at the end of the day, came to negotiate about their nuclear project. The fact that the Americans were very bad negotiators and didn't pay attention to the details of what was needed to negotiate about, it's something different. But the Iranians were ready to come to negotiate about the nuclear project unlike all the recommendations and the experts who told us all around the world about that, the Iranians are not ready to negotiate. I think it's a question of how much pressure you put on the Iranians. The Iranians understand what does it mean if they will be choked by the Americans and the whole economy will collapse. The situation today in Iran economically is very, very, very bad.
Right.
And this is something that should be used by the American negotiators. It's not just that we led to the collapse of the Shiite crescent, as King Abdullah called it. It is more than that. It is now the Iranians are isolated, they are alone. They don't have any proxy to make the job for them. With all due respect to the Houthis, it's not something that should be taken seriously.
Right. No, it's a very good point, General Amidror. We don't emphasize it enough. And here you got to give credit where credit is due, and that's the Tehran regime, by so miserably and incompetently managing this country, not to mention, of course, persecuting its own people, that now they're in a very weak state. I mean, I keep coming back. Here you have a country that has more natural gas than almost any other country in the world, and they can't even heat their schools and office buildings, so much that they have to adjust. They have to close their some of these institutions a day, an extra day a week, or sometimes that we've seen in recent months because of lack of natural gas, because of insufficient heat and so on. So for this, it's not the Israelis that get credit, but it's the Tehran regime, and they're very vulnerable right now. But I'm not sure the United States fully appreciates that. Honestly, it's not clear to me if that's fully understood here in Washington. Look, we only have 3 minutes left. I did want to talk about Syria, but let me just ask something about Yemen, since both generals mentioned this already. Look, they constantly read about these sirens that go off, especially if they're in the middle of the night, where if you have kids or grandchildren, they got to be woken up, brought to a shelter. It must be extremely disruptive and traumatic, especially for the kids. And it must be extremely frustrating for Israelis. But as been pointed out here earlier, Israel can't do everything it might want to do because it's got to be ready on the Iranian side, as General Ayish suggested. Anything to say on this? Are we just going to continue to see this till the Iran issue gets resolved one way or another?
Well,
Look,
just 5 minutes before we started the webinar, a missile was launched and intercepted above Tel Aviv, especially for this session. But I think the picture is very clear. There are a lot of balls that we are dealing with, and we have to prioritize them. And I think if we would follow this webinar, the prioritization here in the webinar is very similar to what we do here. We'll take them one at a time, and we are strong to deal with it.
General Amidror, you got a bunch of grandchildren.
I think that you have to remember that Sana'a, the hours of flight to Sana'a are more than the hours of flight to Tehran, and no question where is the most dangerous problem of Israel is staying. So let's see.
Okay. Great. We'll end now. We'll talk about Syria next time more, although it came up.
Maybe next time it will be after the ceasefire agreement, and
that's true.
will got
if there
some
is one,
of his hostages.
we'll have a special webinar for that. We hope get these hostages home. So want to thank General Amidror, General Ayish, John Hanna. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all for participating, and look forward to having you all involved with us in our next webinar in the war. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the afternoon in Laila Tov there in Israel.